chapter 16 of Mountains of Spices. Today we are on the mountain of myrrh, which is the fruit of the spirit, meekness. And the subtitle for this chapter is Heaven is the Kingdom of Love. The mountain of myrrh was the place where the king grew the lovely trees of meekness, which yielded in great abundance a spice which was a special favorite of his. These trees grew on the next to the last of the 9 peaks forming the mountains of spices, which together formed a lofty circle of high places surrounding the valley of humiliation. Although there were narrow gorges between them, leading out into countless other valleys. By the time the king and his companion reached this 8th mountain, therefore, they had almost completed the circle, and only the mountain of aloes still lay between them and the mountain of pomegranates, which had been their first starting point. The mountain of myrrh, however, differed quite startlingly from all the other mountains in the group. Diverse as all of them had been, it was very similar in shape to the low black mountain in the foreground of the mountain of pomegranates. That is to say, it was an almost perfect pyramid, though it towered far higher than the poor black mountain. Indeed, it rose higher than any of the other 8 mountains, saving only the mountain of pomegranates on which grew the trees of love. The bushes from which the spice of meekness was obtained clothed the slopes almost from top to bottom. They were unlike any of the spice trees elsewhere. They reminded Grace and Glory of the little thorn tree which had so wonderfully sweetened the bitter waters of the spring of Myrrh on her way up to the high places, of which she had drunk when she knelt and accepted willingly that which was to break her heart. Indeed, the king told her, when she mentioned this, that the thorn tree growing beside that spring was a species of myrrh tree, and had been transplanted from the mountain on which they stood and planted on those far lower slopes where, although it could only live in a stunted and imperfect form, it yet contained the same precious spice which sweetened the unpalatable and bitter waters of the spring. She noticed that all the bushes growing here in their native element were low, and were covered with sharp thorns, and possessed very scanty foliage. At this season of the year, however, all the bushes were in bud, preparing to break forth into blossom. The king told her that in a little while they would all be completely covered with flowers. He promised to bring her to the mountain again at the time of blossom, and then the whole place would glow as though garbed in a royal crimson robe. At the moment, however, just as the buds were beginning to appear at the tip of each long, sharp thorn, a group of the king's workmen were busy among the bushes, making incisions in each little tree trunk from which would bleed the precious gum resin of meekness into vessels carefully placed to receive it. Before the trees could bloom in all their glory, they must offer themselves and their precious inner treasure of fragrant resin to all who cared to gather it. They bared themselves to the sharp knife, that through the incisions thus made they might empty themselves in glad self-giving and thanksgiving. As they worked with their knives, making incisions in all the trees, the king's servants sang this song. Do not fear the cutting knife, do not shrink in pain. Let the red drops of thy life fall like bleeding rain. That which thou to death dost give is the seed which yet shall live. Do not fear the winter's breath. Let the seed drop to the earth. Everything laid down to death waits a resurrection birth. Let the flower drop on the thorn, fairer glories shall be born. Do not try to hold life's joys, or the past year's golden store. Love it is who thus destroys, to make room for so much more. Love it is with radiant face, leading to a wealthier place. Do not let self-pity bleed, bitterness, or fierce regret. These are worms which kill the seed and sad misery beget. With a willing heart let go, God will richer gifts bestow. Learn the lesson fast or slow. This is heaven's law. We must let the old things go to make room for more. We shall reap in some glad way fairer joys than lost today. The scene was one of such special and affecting beauty that for some time Grace and Glory was quite speechless as she looked at all the little wounded thorn trees pouring themselves out through the lacerations made in their very hearts, and as she noticed that every bleeding thorn was crowned with a crimson bud just about to break forth into royal bloom. The bitter, sweet perfume of the oozing resin of myrrh, the spice specially used for anointing the dead, filled the air. "These are my happy trees," said the king at last with one of his loveliest smiles, as he seated himself on a low bank. "These are the meek who inherit the earth, and of such is the kingdom of heaven." Grace and Glory looked at him eagerly and waited to hear what he would say next. They sat for a few moments in silence, and then the quiet voice went on. "These little trees of meekness, breathing out this lovely fragrance and pouring out the treasure of their hearts, have a great lesson to teach, Grace and Glory. I have brought you here that, as you sit among them, you may learn of me, who am meek and lowly in heart, and may not only find rest for your soul, but may learn the secret of heaven. When I say to you, let this mind be in you, which was also in your Lord, who humbled or emptied himself, you have a lovely illustration all around you of what it means to empty oneself. Here you see demonstrated before you the gracious, happy spirit which yields up its very self to be poured out for the use of others, without caring at what cost it is accomplished, nor even if it must be by means of the knife which cuts away the very deepest treasure of the heart. This meekness, this willingness to be emptied and humbled, and humility is nothing but willingness to accept humiliations sweetly and unresentfully, is the chief characteristic of the citizens of the kingdom of love and of all who live in heaven. It is the very nature of the Son of Man himself. Meekness is self-giving and sharing, even with those who demand all and give nothing in return, who take by force and thereby take advantage of the meekness which will not resist them. It is the very opposite of self-assertion and self-getting. Here in these little trees of meekness you have the perfect picture of the kingdom of heaven. For remember, the kingdom of heaven is everywhere where the law of love is practiced and perfectly obeyed, and where I, who am the King of love, reign. It is my kingdom come in the hearts of men, and then through them come on earth. The meek of the earth already live in heaven. That is to say, they have their roots in heaven, though for a little while longer their bodies are in the material world and subject to pain and death. The meek are like the lilies whose blossoms float on top of the water, but whose roots go down into quite another realm out of sight below the water. For a little while they sat without speaking, watching the king's gardeners as they worked among the happy or blessed trees of meekness, making incisions in them through which each tree might gladly and thankfully pour out its own self to others, and in so doing be made ready to burst into a glory of bloom and fruitfulness. At last Grace and Glory turned and looked again into the face of the King of Love, the one who plans for all his lovers such unutterably glorious destinies in the future. As she looked into his face and put her hand into his nail-pierced hand, close to the wound in his side, through which his very life had been poured forth for all mankind, she prayed him to show her how she too might pour forth her own life to share with others. Before they left the mountain of meekness, he sang another of the mountain songs. Oh, blessed are the patient meek, who quietly suffer wrong. How glorious are the foolish weak, by God made greatly strong. So strong they take the conqueror's crown and turn the whole world upside down. O dreaded meek, none can resist the weapon which they wield. Force melts before them like a mist. Earth's strong ones faint and yield. Yea, slay them, lay them in the dust, but bow before them earth's might must. Immortal meek, who take the earth by flinging all away, who die, and death is but their birth, who lose and win the day. Hewn down and stripped and scorned and slain, as earth's true kings, they live and reign. O Christ-like meek, by heaven blessed, before whom hell must quake, by foolish blinded men oppressed, who yet the earth do shake. O seed of him who won through loss and conquered death while on a cross. And that is the end of chapter 16. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and grant you his shalom.